Washington Journal continues.
We're joined by Colonel Cedric Leighton. He was a former member of the Pentagon Joint Staff. That's from 2005 to 2009. Also the Deputy Training Director of the NSA. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Pedro.
We heard this week about cyber attacks at two banks. What happened?
Well, basically what we're looking at is you have Bank of America and Pt1 Chase. They're the ones that, of course, are two major U.S. banks. And what they ended up doing was they were victims of a cyber attack that resulted in not getting into any customer databases as far as we know, but they did end up affecting the speed of the websites. So what that meant is that when customers entered the websites, they had much slower service, so they couldn't access their accounts as readily as they usually can, and it was a bit of an inconvenience. It wasn't a case of actually manipulating data or changing data, but it was a case of slowing down the data and making it hard for people to conduct business.
Something called a denial of service attack.
That's exactly right. It is a denial of service attack, and what that means is you basically flood the servers that control, say, Bank of America or JP Morgan. You flood those servers with much more traffic than they can handle, and when that happens, that slows down the traffic and makes it much more difficult for people to conduct business with that website.
The headline in many of the papers, and this stems from an interview that Senator Joe Lieberman did with us on C-SPAN, is that people are looking to Iran for this.
Yes, and that is very interesting because, of course, Senator Lieberman has access to some intelligence and knows some things that are out there that are going on right now in the operational realm. But when you look at what has happened with Iran, when you look at the fact of the Stuxnet virus, when you look at the Flame virus, those are two forms of malware that were forced into the Iranian system, and the reporting is that they came from, at least Stuxnet came from the U.S. and Israel. So if that's true, there are certain aspects of that which indicate that, of course, they're going to retaliate in kind. This is something that was foreseen by a lot of us in the cybersecurity industry, because once you start playing that game, people are going to use the same realm to go after you. And in this particular case, you is a collective term for anything in the United States. They make no distinction between government or private sector, private individuals, or anything like that. It's all about getting after people that represent America, and in this case the banks represent America. And the other thing that I should mention is that not only did this denial of service attack affect Pt1 Chase and Bank of America, it was also focused on the New York Stock Exchange, which of course is the bed of all things capitalists, all things related to American industry, American finance, and that becomes a very, very, very big deal.
We're going to take calls for our guests in just a few moments. The lines will be in your screen. 202 area code for Democrats, 202-737-0001. For Republicans, 202-737-0002. And for Independents, 202-628-0205. Again, cybersecurity attacks that took place at two banks and other places, as our guests mentioned. We also mentioned that Senator Lieberman, during his Newsmakers interview with us, talked about this. As you're calling in, here's what Senator Lieberman had to say.
I don't believe that these were just hackers who were skilled enough to break in, to cause a disruption of the websites, the cyberspace of Bank of America and Pt1 Chase. I think that this was done by Iran and the Quds Force, which has its own developing cyber attack capacity, and I believe it was a response to the increasingly strong economic sanctions that the United States and our European allies have put on Iranian financial institutions.
Colonel, he said developing cyber attack capacity. Could you expand on that?
Sure. The Quds Force, and which is part of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards element, and then also the Iranian Intelligence Service, both have nascent cyber capabilities. And what that means is they've actually developed divisions that are their own cyber warfare army, basically. And they've actually publicly announced the fact that they have this. They have actually gone out and said, we are going to go after the people that go after us, and of course that means the United States and Israel, and we're going to deny them use of cyberspace. Cyberspace is a realm just like air, sea, and land, and we're going to be seeing much more of this. We've seen it with Russia attacking Estonia back in 2007, and Georgia in 2008. In the case of Georgia, it was both a cyber and a physical thing. In the case of Estonia, it was only a cyber attack. But these are the kinds of things that really speak to the future of warfare. Each and every conflict in the future, as long as we have cyberspace, is going to involve some element of cyberspace, because that is where our information flows. That is where we have all of the things that we do in our daily lives. And what that also means is that each and every one of us is going to be affected by that. It's not just a frontline thing anymore. It is an all-encompassing thing that may require action by everyday citizens.
How prepared are we?
Not very. And it depends on which sector you're looking at. The reason that the denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, did not affect Pt1 Chase or Bank of America or the New York Stock Exchange more than they did. They were basically inconveniences, is that the financial services industry actually has some pretty robust cybersecurity capabilities. However, you always have to stay one step ahead of either hackers or state-sponsored hackers. So they're the hacktivists on one side, and then they're the folks that do this kind of thing for the state, and in this case, the state being Iran, purportedly. The Iranians, have a very, very considerable intelligence effort. They've been doing that for years, and they are also working very hard, as I mentioned earlier, in the cyber realm, because they see that as an avenue to get after our weaknesses.
Our guest with us until the end of this program, cybersecurity issues, the preparedness of the United States, especially in light of this news this week. New York City, you're up first. This is Mike, Democrats Line. Hi.
Hey, thank you so much for taking my call. Cyber attacks and other forms of attacks, it seems as though many countries do it, right? So if whether we do it or they do it, how do I get my children in a world where instead of us having strictly discussions about he said, she said, tit for tat, we look at ways to use technology to help feed people and protect people and put clothes and food into poor people's mouths. Right now, I appreciate your guest, but I'm struggling in New York, and I don't care if it was Iran. I'm looking for leaders to talk about issues. How do we take computers and use them to help to educate children?
Caller, appreciate that, but we'll stick to the topic. But his point, as far as the administration is concerned, what have they done as far as this area?
Well, they've done several things. It's very interesting because they tried to support some of the legislation that was on the Hill. And in fact, Senator Lieberman sponsored a major piece of cybersecurity legislation which ended up failing to pass the Senate. There were several other measures, one sponsored by the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Rogers, Republican from Michigan, that would have brought the intelligence community more aligned with the business world, would have made them more aligned, and it would have gotten threat information in the cyber realm to a lot of the different private entities, not only in the defense sector, which currently does happen to an extent, but also financial services, healthcare providers, utilities, all of the members of the critical infrastructure that is in private hands as well as governmental hands. And the idea there between both pieces of legislation, although they had different ways of implementing it and different focuses in terms of who would implement that, was basically designed to increase our cybersecurity awareness and also make sure that we had some minimum standards by which we could actually determine whether or not a website was meeting minimum security requirements. Right now, the United States has no minimum cybersecurity requirements as a broad general sense. There are standards within the U.S. government, particularly the Department of Defense, as well as some of the other elements of the U.S. government. And because of the failure of the legislation to pass the houses of Congress, President Obama is looking at implementing an executive order, which would at the very least affect government entities and would also seek to encourage businesses to provide cybersecurity information when they're affected by attacks such as these denial of service attacks. And those are the kinds of things that they can do. The one weakness with executive orders, though, is that they cannot engage in liability protection for companies that want to share information with the government. So if that's the case, companies don't have an incentive, and they in fact have a legal disincentive from sharing information with the government and vice versa. So that's where we are right now. We basically don't have a coherent cybersecurity legal framework, and we don't have a coherent way of actually dealing with cybersecurity issues outside of the government sector. Within the government sector, it varies by agency. The Department of Defense probably has the most robust cybersecurity protection efforts. But these types of things, are evolving constantly. And one of the points that the Republicans make, those that oppose, for example, Senator Lieberman's bill, they make the point that the threat is evolving so constantly that you really cannot put yourself in front of it. You don't know what standards to put ahead, because hackers, whether they're state-sponsored or hacktivists, will go ahead and morph into different capabilities. The other side of that, though, is if you don't have minimum standards, then you can't, set that basic baseline from which to operate, and that's really the dilemma that we're in. It's a very huge political issue. Business community on one side, government on another, but the basic idea is that we have a real situation here where, if we're not careful, we are going to find ourselves in a cyber Pearl Harbor, and if we have a cyber Pearl Harbor, that is going to create some significant situations where we could go as far as losing lives, especially if they affect critical infrastructure elements such as utilities. People depend on refrigeration to keep medicines safe. If that goes away, there are going to be some significant penalties, and there's other things that could happen that are much more drastic, and that could really affect things.
Tracy on our Republican line, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Thanks for Cspan. I was doing a little background check on Mr. Leighton on the internet. He's been blaming Iran for stuff throughout the years anyway, but I don't think this is Iran. But I think our biggest threat to cybersecurity and espionage probably comes from Israel and maybe some of China. But I doubt Iran has anything to do with this at all. I just think they're taking another tack to build up another case for attacking them for some reason or another. I just think it's another front, and I'll take his comment after air. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Here's the basic idea. The Iranians are very, very interested in, keeping not only what they have right now in terms of their governmental structure, but they also are very, very influential and seeking to increase that influence within the Middle East. There is no doubt that the Iranians, for example, are supporting the government of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. There is also no doubt that the Iranians have worked other cyber elements. They have actually gone in and done some things that are very threatening from a cybersecurity standpoint, many of which are actually classified. But here's the bottom line. There is also some evidence that the Iranians may have been behind the recent distributed denial of service attack against Aramco, which is the Saudi Arabian oil company. That is a major deal because, according to some reports, Aramco was affected in such a way that 30,000 of their workstations were actually taken offline. That affected production in the world's largest oil producer. It also made it very critical, from not only an oil production standpoint, but it could also affect all kinds of things in terms of how the world economy works. So the Iranian threat is not a paper threat. The Iranian threat is real. And the reason the Iranian threat is real is because there are so many elements that the Iranians want to support. They want to go after us in every single way that they can. They are much more active in this than any other country. And as far as the relationship with Israel is concerned, Israel also has a cyber capability, but that cyber capability has not been done in a way that affects our country to a great extent. They are certainly looking at things within our network, I'm convinced, as well. But the Israelis are in a situation where they are seeking to find out more and more about what the Iranian intentions are, whether it's in the cyber realm or in the nuclear realm or in the general forces realm. So the Iranians, they are no lily pad. They're basically a very dangerous country, but we have to be very careful with going after, in terms of going after Iran, because the Iranians, are not only very astute at doing certain things, but sometimes what they say is not exactly what they plan on doing.